Hey guys, we have made it to the final lecture of the semester, and it's going to be a little bit longer. We're going to cover a lot of stuff, but it hopefully should be pretty interesting. So let's dig into it. We are at key idea number 3 to start. We talked about economics before, we talked about the idea of sustainability, and now we're going to be looking at environmental policy, what we are actually doing to try to create a culture of sustainability. Yeah, we're going to get into some of these details. So first, we're going to talk about capital, first of all. What is capital, and what are the things that we value? What are the resources of the world, and how do we utilize them? So let's go through that. This says economic health depends on the availability of natural capital and basic human welfare. This is a theory, an opinion. This is what we're going to discuss, whether or not you agree with it, but we're going to get into this. So capital, first of all, these in general are economic assets, and we're breaking them out into 3 categories. Natural, those are things like coal, plants, air, whatever, all the things in the natural world, the resources of the planet. And humans are human capital, but not just our capital in terms of physical humans, but the knowledge that we have and our abilities as well. So humans plus their knowledge and abilities. And then the manufactured capital, all the stuff that we're making, all the goods and services that humans can provide and produce. So this is our idea of all the capital in the world. So if you're just thinking of pure market economy, not thinking about environmental costs, like we talked about last time, in a free market, supply and demand is going to dictate the price, and that price is not thinking about externalities, environmental costs, things like that. Environmental economics, though, is thinking about how we're going to utilize and produce the capital, but in an environmental sense. So environmental scientists really are saying that, listen, economics also is going to require this natural capital foundation. You can't, have human and manufactured capital without managing the natural capital in a sustainable way. I mean, you can in the short term. You can be unsustainable, but the future generations will run out of natural capital, and it'll break down the entire economic system. So environmental economics really is trying to look at the costs and benefits of policies and regulations that help, regulate air pollution, water pollution, other things that degrade the environment. It's a cost benefit analysis. There are some costs, real economic costs, to putting in regulations, but that is the world of environmental economics. Ecological economics, a little bit deeper, actually says, okay, we're not going to just consider economics and environmental systems separately. They really believe that they are completely tied together. So it treats the field of economics as a component of ecological systems rather than a separate field. So the big goal, though, is preserve natural capital. Preserving this, they believe, is going to help preserve this and increase these things. So how can we regulate or do a good job of being good stewards with our natural environment to be sustainable, essentially? So that brings us to this idea of sustainable economic systems. Economic systems that are based on the fact that we want to utilize our resources in an efficient way, such that future generations can still reap the benefits of the natural world. So current system, we're all about maximizing resources, maximizing the utilization of resources, energy, and human labor. So max as far as we can go. But an approach that helps this more sustainable is called a cradle-to-grave system for material use and waste recycling. And I have a couple examples of this that I'm going to show you. This is the general idea of a less versus more sustainable economy. Notice these arrows here. So this is a less sustainable economy. We're maximizing our energy and resource extraction outputs, and we're spending very little on ecosystem services, and we give a lot of waste. A more sustainable is we cut that waste by recycling, so putting it back into this loop, and also investing capital into ecosystem services. So yeah, this is a cost, and this is a cost. But hopefully this cost starts outweighing those costs. So the benefits start outweighing the costs of recycling, and actually becomes better for the environment, also profitable. So a couple examples I'm going to bring up are computer companies. This is their kind of cradle to grave picture, and this is fine. It's basically saying, yes, we have raw materials, we make stuff, we produce it, we sell it, we use it, and then we get rid of it. And then we maybe recycle a little bit, but what we're hoping to do with the sustainability is less of this waste and more recycling to put it back into the materials processing. So this dotted line, this can be less raw material extraction and more recycling. So a couple of companies that I've looked up and I think are doing a really good job of this are both Apple and Dell. And they show how they're trying to close the loop in the supply chain, as in raw materials, yes. What they want to do is make stuff consumer use, but grab it before it's disposed of. So we can close this loop back here, where we're using more of it and recycling and using it to process. Same thing with Dell. Purchase and use, but collect and recycle. This closed loop plastic supply chain they're looking at. Apple's really focusing more on the metals side. Most of their products are made of metals. They don't use many plastics in the production of their computers and iPads, things like that. So to get a better view, I found a video of, let's see if this works. I think the sound is going to have to come through my microphone, so it might be a little weird. But we're going to look at one of Apple's robots. It's actually a 4 years old robot. They have new ones now. But this gives you an idea of what Apple's trying to do with their products here. See if we can get this to go.
The iPhone is the result of years of innovation. But true innovation means considering what happens to a product at every stage of its life cycle. Meet Liam. When it's time, Liam deconstructs your iPhone. Parts are detected and removed and separated. So the materials inside those parts can be repurposed to rescue cobalt and lithium from the battery, separate the gold and copper in the camera, extract silver and platinum from the main logic board, so the materials in your iPhone can live on. Because in a world with limited resources, some things can't be replaced.
So there we go. We have an idea of what Apple's trying to do with their.
The iPhone.
Figure out how to get back to the slides. Here we go. So that's their old machine. This is a picture of who they call Daisy, this fully enclosed plexiglass enclosure of a new machine. I think this can do like 200 iPhones in an hour or something crazy of recycling and sorting the parts. So pretty impressive. I'm pretty impressed by what they're doing. I'm trying to close that loop. Get as much of this. They'll do this for free too. They will take your recycling stuff, and obviously this helps them out. It's not like this is just because they're good people and being good stewards. This is helping them out. They're being able to reuse this stuff and lower their production costs by not having to go mine raw materials. But that's overall good for the world. They're being good stewards of those materials. So that's the idea of sustainable kind of economics in a way that's helping the consumer, the environment, and the company itself. So that brings us to more on the official side. So that was, those are companies that are doing this on their own accord. But what about some of the more official, laws, regulations, things like that are designed to help protect our human capital? So we're going to look at a few of those here. And also, before we get into that, how many laws a country has really depends on that country's and that government's worldview. So if your country is anthropocentric, human-centered, this is where you're saying humans are much more highly valued than nature. So that means all this stuff is here simply to provide for our needs. So really heavily focusing on humans are the top of the kingdom, so we have say in how we use our nature. The idea of, however, you can be human-centered, but also have the idea of stewardship. And that is it's the careful and responsible management and care for Earth and its resources. So we're saying, yes, we are humans, but because we have a bigger responsibility that we should protect the natural world and ethically use our materials. I'm going to ask the question at the end here, what do we think is the Christian worldview of how we should utilize our resources? So keep that in mind. But stewardship is still in the realm of anthropocentric because we are still saying that we do have more intrinsic value, but we also have, the responsibility to use our resources ethically. A biocentric worldview would say really focus on life. So humans are just one of many species, so we're all equal. So there's quite a few people out there that believe, listen, we're just animals as well. We're all equal on this earth, so we get equal value to all these other things. Then the ecocentric mind view, earth-centered, this is saying they place equal value on all living organisms. So, and the ecosystems. So this is really the far, far end. So this says it demands that we consider nature free of any associations with our own existence. So a little bit different there. So what is the worldview of Christians then? I don't know. I would argue we're more in the stewardship realm. God has given us these things. Yes, they are there for we're supposed to utilize them and live, clearly, but we should do so in a way that respects animals, respects what God has given us, and does it in God wants us to be good stewards, good managers of what he's given us. I believe that. So I think that worldview would be helpful if our government was based off of those values. I would appreciate that. So some world agencies that think about these things a lot. We have the United Nations, the World Bank, WHO. This is the World Health Organization. Has been in the news all the time lately. I'm not very familiar with the UNDP, but certainly UN, World Bank, and WHO I've heard of quite a bit over the years. And they all have different reasons for forming, but they're all kind of looking out for other people. They're all looking out for the good of the world in some respects. And obviously you can argue whether or not your worldview matches up with them, but they are there in place for countries to get together and inform decisions. In the US, we have things like the EPA, OSHA, the DOE, and interestingly, because before I was doing more research on this, I didn't realize that these are such young organizations. The EPA and OSHA, since only 1970, the DOE 1977, kind of surprised me to learn that these have not been around very long. So the EPA, we're going to look at another slide that shows more stuff going on, but EPA, obviously environment. OSHA is for people working safely, making sure that they are in good working conditions. Department of Energy is like, how are we going to use the energy resources we have in the U.S.? That's a huge, we're talking everything energy related. So even, nuclear energy, for example, this would be DOE kind of stuff. Here are some of the specific acts that came out of this type of stuff. So, for example, let's see here, Clean Air, Clean Water Act. Again, look at the years here in the 1970s. Before that, then, think of how little regulation there was. And again, you could have a different worldview and you don't think the government should be stepping in. However, we as a government and a country voted in people that said we want these things to happen. So Clean Air Act, reducing a lot of those bad emissions that we've talked about in the air. Clean Water Act, making sure we actually have swimmable and fishable rivers. Remember we talked about this a while ago, I forget what chapter, CERCLA, the Superfund Act. That wasn't until 1980. This is that really big money pool that helps clean up really bad hazardous waste sites. So tons and tons remember we learned that even in Wisconsin, there's quite a few Superfund sites. So this is some of the actual formal laws that are in place to promote a sustainable future for people going forward. This is the general idea. If you have these policies, hopefully this is being followed, right? Let's say we policy formulation. Okay, let's start here. We adopt it, and then we start really implementing it. We start looking at companies, what they're doing, enforcing regulations. But we don't want to stop there. Obviously, we want to evaluate the policy and identify new problems, or say we've gotten rid of the old problems and then amend our policy. I like this idea. I don't like the idea of just simply rolling back policies. I'm sure that is amendment, but I think we need to be careful with simply rolling back policies and really being careful to amend them as needed, so we're not losing the benefits that we worked so hard to put in place to get these types of successes. So that's my opinion on that subject. So what about the last key idea here is kind of bringing it to the idea of poverty. And are we being fair with the amount of waste and the environmental harm that's being produced in the world? Where do people hurt the most, considering their different worldviews that their governments might have? So the one way of thinking about sustainability is you can achieve it if you think of social, economic, and environmental costs and benefits, etc. But you need to actually try to put mutual concern in all these areas. So everybody in the world, we should put a mutual concern for social, economic, and environmental issues. So if you really only heavily focus on the environment, you can be losing economic progress and social progress. If you only focus on social, etc. If you only focus on economic, these aren't as sustainable as you could be if you focus on all three. So the triple bottom line focuses on all of these. And they use this Venn diagram to show we have they're all overlapping, they're all intersecting, but if we can be in this middle spot here, we have mutual respect for social issues, economic and environmental issues, we can be more sustainable and help out all three of these things at the same time. Two major challenges, though, are reducing poverty and also stewarding the environment at the same time. These are really big challenges throughout the world. And remember the UN I talked about? They got together in the year 2000, and all the UN nations, the member nations, they came up with this plan called the Millennium Development Goals, apparently. I'm assuming because they started at the new millennium, 2000. Oh, not the year 1000. That should be a 2 there. This ended in 2015. But these were their 8 goals here. So they focus on all these things. They really want to eradicate as much extreme poverty and hunger as possible, increase education, combat HIV and AIDS was a much bigger deal back then. Malaria is still a huge deal, and then the other diseases. And then there's economic stuff here. These are all very broad, right? Ensure environmental sustainability. Clearly, they have pages and pages and pages of documents on how they're going to try to do this. But this is the Millennium Development Goals. You can go to the website and you can read the entire report on how they are doing with this and what's going forward. I also looked up what's going on now. In 2016, they came up with a new plan. They called it the Sustainable Development Goals, probably a better name than the Millennium Development Goals. So these SDG from 2016, this is supposed to end in 2030. So we are well within these new goals. And they came up with 17 goals here. You can see some more specific ones like climate action. Let's see here. Affordable and clean energy. They want to have no poverty, zero hunger. I mean, these are big goals. But I think it's pretty cool that these nations came together and said, we want to do these things. And then inequalities. This is a big deal right now. Income inequality, pollution inequality, etc. So here are some of the inequalities just in terms of the HDI, the Human Development Index. This is based off 3 things: life expectancy, knowledge, and education. And they use adult literacy rate as one of the ways to think about education and access to educational attainment. And then their standard of living, they look at per capita GDP and also individual purchasing power. This is not just the only index, but this is one of them. Notice the dark blue, these are the really high, the developed nations. Look at these European countries, Australia, Canada, United States, Japan, South Korea. Those are the highest HDIs. And then there's varied across the world. Africa, notice really low values in a swath of Central Africa and Northern. This is a tough part of the world in terms of developing, and then also some East Asian countries as well. So those are the countries where they are not really up there. There's a big disparity in the world between these countries and these countries. So people talk about justice and whether that's fair, and there's a lot of arguments that way. The book is arguing, though, in terms of environmental justice. They're asking, is there justice in the fact that if there's an inequitable distribution of pollution and environmental degradation? So the problem is that fair? The fact that developing countries have higher incomes, better living, and also is there an inequal distribution of the pollution going to the developing countries? And is there justice where people that are of lower incomes and minorities have a disproportionate exposure to environmental hazards? I would argue no, that is not justice. People that have low incomes and in the minority communities, why would they have to be exposed more to environmental hazards? I don't think that's fair either. So the book is arguing, listen, and environmental scientists in general, sustainability, this is where justice can be found in the reduction and elimination of poverty and attitude of this kind of stewardship, this responsible stewardship toward the earth and its inhabitants. And I mostly agree with this. I think this is a good way to think about how we should be thinking about the world. Again, it depends on your worldview, but as a Christian, this really, I think, really connects with my worldview very much. One of those, so this is a concrete example of people trying to help and help the environment and help people at the same time. So this is Dr. Mathai, I don't know how to say that, Mathai. She was a Nobel Peace Prize laureate and native of Kenya, and she had this idea. She came up with this organization called the Green Belt Movement, and essentially they would help women by paying them to plant trees. So it came up with money that their job would be to plant trees. So not only were they helping the environment, They were empowering themselves by getting income. And also, this was an investment in the future. So they could actually use these trees in the future for firewood. And this had a big impact on that area. And it's considered a global sustainability success. It helps income inequality and the environmental well-being at the same time. So this was a really cool example that the book showed. And that is where I'm going to stop my discussion. I really enjoyed this chapter myself. I love economics. I love environmental sustainability discussions. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I hope you guys learned a lot more about these topics. Here are some of the review questions that'll help you study at the end. I'll go through them just briefly here so you can see them. But again, I'm going to let you look at these on the PowerPoint themselves. Talked about sustainability. We talked about supply and demand and how it should be affected by externalities. That was kind of a thing we talked about to just kind of bring economics and environmental costs into the same picture, the same discussion. We talked about the difference between GDP and GPI. Remember that gross domestic product, again, does not really look at a lot of those externalities. In the US, we've been launching upward, but our GPI has really been steady. We talked about a few different types of economic ways to help boost lower income people. And we really focused on this cradle to grave concept a lot today. So I'll leave these to you to look through, and we will have our last exam. Thanks for listening, guys, and I will hopefully see you guys on campus in the fall soon.